morning, everyone, again. Please take a moment and pull out of your bulletins for this morning, your message notes. If you brought your Bible, I invite you to turn to Jeremiah in the Old Testament. Pull out a pen or pencil. God's Word is inerrant, infallible, it is true, and living Word. And the more we read it, the more we get into it, the more it speaks to us, not only when we hear it, but throughout the time afterwards. It resonates in our heart. So I invite you to take some notes and let God speak to you this morning. As I mentioned in the beginning, today is the first Sunday of Advent, and I hope that just a raise of hands. I don't want to make you feel guilty, but who here has so far been going through the challenge with me of our devotions on a daily basis, 10-15 minutes? Just raise your hands. Oh, a lot. Awesome. So again, it's 10-15 minutes a day. Just take a moment, find your sacred place, and just kind of go through it and let meditate in God's Word and say and have some time of prayer. Now, part of the challenge was that as extra credit was for you guys to make Advent wreaths, and it helped me because I kind of thought, wow, this way I know if actually it's just me and Sandy doing it, or if all this time I put in it was playing out. So you made my heart happy. So I've had about a half a dozen Advent wreaths that were sent to me, and I actually got a few more this past week. I'm putting it on the screen. So I just want to go ahead and play that for me, Peggy. And here's some of the pictures of some of the Advent wreaths that were sent to me. Yeah, it really is. That's my son's Joel's. It's just 4 candles, but it's still very lovely. That's with the manger. Isn't that nice? Great. So if you haven't grabbed one yet and you would like to join us in our Advent devotions, like I said, they are in the back. Just grab them on the way out. So we are starting a brand new message series this morning for the season of Advent that I've entitled Yuletide Joy, the King is Coming. And so Advent means coming. It means the coming of the Messiah. And it's our time for us to get ready for the coming King. And so I just to raise their hands again. Who here has their Christmas trees up yet? Oh, wow, good. How about Christmas tree lights out in the house? No, okay, just a few. I know, you know what, I'm a pastor, and like Sandy and I are the only ones in our whole block that don't have our Christmas trees up. We look like Scrooges. What's wrong with those Lutheran pastors, you know? But here's the thing, and that is, honestly, preparing for Christmas doesn't really happen at home, putting up Christmas trees or lights. It really happens here on Sunday morning as we begin to prepare our hearts and minds for the coming King. And you know, as we wait for the Messiah, that's the greatest gift. It's a Christmas gift that you can't get in 2 days with Amazon Prime. Doesn't come with fancy bows and Christmas wrap. Rather, he was born in a manger in Bethlehem. And his first cradle was a feeding trough because there was no other room for him. And that is the greatest gift, and one that we're going to look at and share these next 4 weeks. Now, generally speaking, Advent is broken down really into 4 sections: hope, peace, joy, and love. But what I'd like to do for the next 4 weeks is just focus on that one, just joy. And what does Advent Christmas joy really look like? Now, the thing is throughout the Bible, in the very beginning, you kind of see joy is mentioned over and over and over again, and it builds into a crescendo until Christmas comes. The moment that Jesus is born, there's sort of this crescendo of joy that takes place. But here's the fact of the matter, and that is sometimes in our life, when Christmas rolls around, we don't really feel very joyful. And sometimes we're going through dark and difficult times, And the whole idea of joy at Christmas just seems like a cruel joke. And we think, how can I have joy at a time like this? Well, let's start with, what is joy? There's a lot of different ideas. In fact, so most people think that joy is an extreme pleasure from something that happens, right? Something that happens and we get this extreme joy. And we understand that, right? You know, when I get to hang out with Joel, I have this joy. When my daughter Brooke comes and visits, I have joy. When I go out to dinner with my lovely wife Sandy and we have a great dinner and I can actually eat and have some great wine, I have joy, right? And one of the things that we learn just from that is joy is really more associated with relationships than things, aren't they? But sometimes it's hard to have joy when things in our life aren't going as they should. Now here's the thing, in the Bible, joy is actually more associated with a matter of the heart, a disposition of the heart, than a feelings. Here's the fact that the truth is, and that is that true joy is a matter of being, according to the Bible. Look at this passage in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Talking about Jesus, it says, because of the joy waiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Wow. Waiting for a cross, waiting to die, that doesn't seem like a reason to be very joyful, does it? And yet Hebrews says that it was a matter of joy for Jesus to go to the cross. Why? Because Jesus understood what going to the cross really meant. And that is bringing salvation to us. And then James 1:2 says, consider it, here's this word again, pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face many kinds of trials. So when we go through trials, he says, consider it joy. That's not a reason that we get joy for most people, right? Bad things happen, I go through difficult times, challenging things happen, and I'm supposed to be full of joy. But again, you have to realize that according to the Bible, joy is more a disposition of the heart than a feeling. See, we have this joy because God walks with us. We just sang, O come, Emmanuel. Emmanuel literally means God with us. And when you go through the Bible and you begin to read, you begin to understand something. And Matthew points this out, that Jesus is the turning point, the key to God with us. In fact, you might remember at the very end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, lo what? I am with you. How long? Always. Until the end of the age. It's another word for what? Emmanuel. So even at the end of Matthew, God, Jesus is still our Emmanuel. There's this theologian, I don't want you going home today thinking, wow, Pastor Gary is so smart, because it's really not my idea. There's a theologian, her name is Mary Ann Thompson, and she did a study on joy. And she said, over the 400 times that joy is mentioned in the Bible, you can actually categorize them into 3 categories. And that's what I want to kind of look at this morning with you. And the first is conditional joy. Conditional joy. You get this one. Okay? You get this. Conditional joy is when we're joyful because something good happens. Right? There's something in our life happens and we experience real joy because of that. But the problem is that type of joy is really short-lasting. Right? I can go out to dinner with Sandy, we have this great meal, I feel full. Sandy says I get my after-eating afterglow, right? I'm all smiling, he's had this great meal. But an hour later, I'm hungry again. Right? This type of conditional joy, although it's real, it's fast-fleeting. And this is the reason why some people, when they get to Christmas, they become so depressed. Because everyone around them is saying, you need to be joyful. It's Christmas. It's Christmas. And they're expecting joy to be something that's conditional. And if they're having a tough time in life, if there's a problem with their children or their finances or their health, they think, how am I supposed to be joyful when things aren't going joyful around me? That's the problem with conditional joy. We get that bah humbug mentality. But here's the second type of joy. And that's anticipatory joy. That is joy that happens in our life, good or bad, during good times or dark times, that we still have a joy in our life because it's part of our being. It's in our DNA. And we are hoping on a promise of deliverance that God has given us, or we look back in the past and see what God has done. I'll give you an example. 586 BC. You might think, well, what's the big thing about 586 BC? In the Bible, it's a huge date. Right? It's a huge date. It's like September 11th, 2001. What happened in 586 BC? Well, in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was in what was today be Iraq. And he comes in, he goes up north, he comes in, and he defeats Israel. And he lays it to waste. Destroys Jerusalem, destroys Israel, and takes most of their people in shackles and chains and leads them back out to Babylon. And during this time, they were there for about 75 years, and it's a time of great distress and darkness. People are prisoners. Their homeland has been destroyed. Their family members have been slaughtered. This is not a reason to be joyful. They thought today is lousy and it's not going to get any better. But here's the thing. In the middle of this event, the prophets begin to write. It's where we get Nehemiah and Jeremiah. And in the middle of this dark time, the prophets begin to write about hope. Psalm 30, verse 5 says this: weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Understand that during this time of exile, during this time of imprisonment, it wasn't morning yet. They're still weeping. They're still in darkness, and yet there's this promise that in the morning, they'll be dancing. And you see, no matter what we go through in our life, we can have real joy because we have a promise that God is with us. That in the end, God will work all things out. That dancing in the morning, it might not be a 24-hour morning. It might not be the next day. It might be 6 months or a year from now or 2 years from now. But the fact of the matter is, joy will come once again. And Jeremiah says this in Jeremiah 31, verse 13. He says, I will turn their joy, their mourning, into gladness. I will give them comfort and joy instead of sorrow. It's a matter of the heart. It is independent of the things that are going around outside of your life. Because if we begin to depend on our joy, being on the outside, joy is always going to be short-lived. But our joy is from God coming to us, living in our hearts, giving us promises and hope. Promises and hope. Jeremiah 29 says this is another famous verse, but he goes, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Now I want you to know that when God wrote this, originally he was writing it to the Israelites, who were enslaved or in bondage They've got no hope, no future. They're living in dark times, and then God comes to them and says, I want you to know I've got plans for you. All is not lost. I know it seems lost, and I know with your own minds you're looking and you're trying to figure out how is this all going to work out, and there's no solution, but I've got the solution, God says. And in fact, they do go home. And when they go home, there is dancing and singing and rejoicing. But here's the thing I want you to know. These words that Jeremiah spoke aren't just for the Israelites. They're for you personally. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. That's his individual goal for each one of you. He has plans and a future for you. I don't care if you're 2 years old or 102. He has plans and a purpose for you. He's got hope for you. And you see, it doesn't really matter if good things are happening or bad things, if we're on the top of the mountain or in the valley. What we know is that God is with us, that God is with you, that he's working through this with you. In the middle of World War II, with Hitler, there was a Lutheran theologian. His name was Dietrich von Hagen. And Dietrich von Hagen, one of my heroes, was a German. He was a German theologian. And he actually came to New York. He went to New York to study and to teach at New York University. And while he was there, he began to read more and more what was going on in Germany with Hitler and the concentration camps. And Dietrich von Hagen finally decided, he said, you know what, I need to go back home. I need to go home and be with my friends, my family, and we need to do something with what's going on there with Hitler. And all of Bonhoeffer's friends, his colleagues, his students begged him. They're like, Dietrich, don't go back. If you go back, it's going to mean your death. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, I need to go back. And so he goes back, and he begins to preach. And what had happened at the time was Hitler was trying to get all these churches to sort of sign up with Nazism. And they had these pastors and churches sign documents that said, basically, you can go on and do what you want as long as you sign up with Nazism and you really preach Hitler and the Third Reich. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer went and preached against this, and it got him into some trouble. And after a while, there was a plot actually to kill Hitler. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a major player in this plot to overtake Hitler, and failed. And as a result, he was taken to a concentration camp. And there he stayed, and every day he saw hell on earth. He saw people dying of miserable deaths, people being slaughtered. And there was a guy there, his name was Captain Kane Best. And he later wrote, and he said, every time I saw Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was always full of hope and joy. And he said, I've never met anyone whose God was so real to him and so close. In fact, the day before he was put to death, Dietrich Bonhoeffer preached a sermon on hope and joy. The day before the concentration camps were liberated, they took Dietrich Bonhoeffer out and they stripped him naked. And they hung him with wire. But before he died, they said the last thing he did was kneeled and prayed and gave thanks to God. He had joy, even though his surroundings were dark. How is that possible? Because he knew what real joy was. It was God with us. God walking through with us. And in the end, God makes all things right. Here's the last one that's kind of closely related to that, and that is, there's a confidence joy. What is confidence joy? And that is confidence that God will never waste a suffering, a hurt, or a pain. That whatever you go through, no matter what pain you go through, God won't waste it. that somehow God will bring good from it. That's why Paul says this in Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Regardless of the situation. Why? Because we know that God will bring all things. Henry Nouwen once said this. He said, joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day. Joy comes from knowing that God is with us. Lo, I am with you always to the very end of the age. O come, Emmanuel. That God walks with us. Good things come and go. Sandy and I were putting up our tree the other day. Couldn't find our decorations. That was sort of like crazy. We're like running around trying to find decorations. We came up with these goofy little ones. Finally, we said, oh, let's go to the mall. I went and got Sandy a really neat, cool Christmas present. I won't tell you what it is, but it's really cool. But here's the thing about Christmas, and that is Christmases come and go. But not God. Jesus comes and he stays with us. That's why God sent him in the first place. Not just that he would be born in a manger and we see a cute little baby, but that he would grow up and lead a perfect life. Die on the cross for us, that we might be with him forever. C.S. Lewis once said this. He said, only in death will we ever come to the realization that our entire life from birth to death was just the prologue in the title page to the greatest adventure that God has for you. This Advent season, I want us to keep in mind these words of Habakkuk. Only 3 chapters long. But this is what he closes with. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, a dark time, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. How can we have joy in that time? Emmanuel. Because God is with us. He's the source of our joy. That God comes with us. He redeems us, gives us life, and walks with us. Amen.